In the 41st millennium, there is only war. The Imperium of man spans 1,000,000 worlds, each one a testament to humanity's will to survive in a galaxy that wants them dead. On every planet, in every hive city, in every forgotten corner of the Emperor's domain, billions toil in darkness, their lives measured not in years but in the quota of their labor. They are told that suffering is holy, that pain is purpose, that to question is to invite damnation. The ecclesiarchy preaches that humanity's salvation lies in obedience, that the God Emperor watches from his golden throne, that faith alone shields them from the horrors beyond the stars. They are not told that sometimes, the most dangerous things are not born of the warp, nor forged by xenos' hands, nor whispered by the ruinous powers. Sometimes, the greatest threats are older than the Imperium itself, artifacts from ages when gods walked among mortals and played games with reality as mortals play with dice. Hive World Severance Prime hung in the void like a bleeding wound, its surface a cancerous sprawl of industrial towers and hab blocks that stretched from pole to pole. 90 billion souls crammed into vertical cities that clawed at the polluted sky, each level a distinct realm of existence. The spires pierced the clouds where nobles breathed recycled air and pretended the world below didn't exist. The mid-hive teemed with factorum workers, administratum scribes, and Arbites enforcers maintaining the Emperor's order through violence and bureaucracy. And below that, sinking into the planet's crust like a suppurating wound, lay the Underhive, a lawless abyss where the Imperium's light flickered and died. Jaren Koss had lived in the Underhive for all 23 years of his miserable existence. He was unremarkable, thin from chronic malnutrition, scarred from gang violence, missing 2 fingers on his left hand from a factorum accident in his youth. He scavenged archaeotech from the ruins of old Severance, the ancient city buried beneath millennia of industrial waste and corpse starch processing. Most scavers died within a year, crushed by collapsing ruins, killed by mutants, or dragged off by things that had no names in Imperial Gothic. Jaren survived through cowardice and an almost supernatural ability to sense danger. Today, that sense had failed him. The ruins of Sublevel 97 were older than the Imperium itself, pre-Unity structures that predated even the Age of Strife. The Mechanicus had quarantined this sector 6 centuries ago after an excavation team vanished, sealing it with warnings in Binaric Cant and High Gothic. By order of the Adeptus Mechanicus, unauthorized entry is tech heresy punishable by death. Jaren had bypassed the seals 3 days ago, driven by desperation. His water reclamator had failed, and without the 20-throne Gelt to repair it, he'd be dead within a week. The chamber he'd found defied explanation. It was circular, 30 meters across, its walls covered in symbols that hurt to look at, not Gothic, not xenos glyphs, nothing in any database he'd ever accessed through stolen data slates. The symbols seemed to writhe when viewed peripherally, resolving into different shapes depending on the angle. Green light emanated from cracks in the floor, not the sickly glow of radioactive waste but something vital, almost organic. The air tasted of ozone and something else, something that made his teeth ache and his skin prickle. At the chamber's center sat a pedestal of black stone, and on that pedestal rested a wooden mask. Jaren approached slowly, his rebreather hissing in the strange atmosphere. The mask was carved from wood that should have rotted to dust millennia ago, yet appeared freshly lacquered. Its features were exaggerated, wide grin, hollow eyes, a face frozen in manic joy. Green paint still clung to the surface in swirls and whirls that suggested both laughter and screaming. Something about it pulled at him, not with the psychic pressure of warp-touched objects he'd learned to avoid, but with a magnetic inevitability, as if the mask had been waiting specifically for him across thousands of years. "Emperor preserve me," he whispered, the words automatic. His grandmother had been devout, had taught him prayers before the gangers killed her. He hadn't spoken them in years, but terror brought them back. He reached for the mask. His hand trembled. Every survival instinct screamed at him to run, but his fingers closed around it anyway. The wood was warm, almost feverish. The moment his skin made contact, the green light in the chamber's cracks flared brilliant, and Jaren heard laughter, not voices, but pure laughter given sound, the kind that existed before language, before thought, the primal sound of chaos recognizing a kindred spirit. Put me on, something whispered, not in his ears but directly into his thoughts. Put me on and show this miserable universe what real chaos looks like. Jaren Koss, scavenger, nobody, doomed man, raised the mask to his face. The moment it touched his skin, reality hiccuped. The chamber's green light exploded outward in a shockwave that reduced ancient stone to powder. Jaren's scream of terror became a howl of laughter, his body convulsing as the mask fused to his flesh. His ragged scaver clothes dissolved, replaced by a zoot suit of brilliant yellow, a purple fedora materializing on his head. His body reshaped itself, muscles inflating like balloons, teeth sharpening into a predator's grin, eyes burning with radioactive green fire. When the transformation completed, the thing that had been Jaren Koss stood in the ruins and laughed. It was a sound that hadn't echoed in this galaxy for millions of years, a sound that predated the birth of the Chaos Gods, a sound that made the warp itself pause in confusion. Somewhere in the mid-hive, a psyker attached to an Arbites precinct house began screaming and couldn't stop. The augurs in the Adeptus Mechanicus Forge Temple registered a reality fluctuation that matched nothing in their databanks. And in the shadows between dimensions, four entities that called themselves gods turned their attention to Hive Severance Prime with curiosity and growing concern. The mask-wearer looked down at his yellow-gloved hands, flexing fingers that could now bend steel like putty. He looked at the ruins around him, the grinding poverty, the darkness, the endless suffering that was life in the Imperium, and his grin widened impossibly. "Somebody stop me," he howled into the darkness, and the Underhive, for the first time in its 10,000-year history, heard something worse than despair. It heard joy. The Arbites Precinct House for Sublevel 83 was a fortress of reinforced rockcrete and gun emplacements, designed to withstand full-scale gang wars and occasional Genestealer incursions. Its walls were 3 meters thick, studded with automated defense turrets. Inside, 200 enforcers maintained the Emperor's law through shock mauls, shotguns, and the occasional public execution. Arbitrator Marshal Venick Thras had served the Adeptus Arbites for 37 years, and in that time, he'd seen everything the Underhive could produce: narcogangs high on obscura, chaos cultists babbling in dark tongues, mutant uprisings, even a rogue servitor that had murdered 12 citizens before they'd melted its cortex with lost fire. He had never seen anything like the pict feed currently displaying on his command throne's view screen. "Replay it," he ordered, his augmetic eye whirring as it focused on the grainy footage. The servo-skull hovering at his shoulder complied, rewinding the surveillance capture from Street Market Gamma 7. The footage showed the usual Underhive misery, crowds of malnourished workers shuffling between corpse starch vendors and black market water merchants, their faces vacant with despair. Then, at timestamp 14 hours 47 minutes and 23 seconds, reality seemed to bend. A figure appeared at the edge of frame, not walking, but somehow just there, as if the universe had forgotten he hadn't been standing there all along. The figure wore yellow. Bright, impossibly vibrant yellow that shouldn't exist in the Underhive's perpetual gloom. A suit that looked like something from ancient Terran entertainments, pre-Unity decadence. And the face, Emperor's Mercy, the face, was a green mask stretched in a lunatic grin, eyes burning like miniature stars. What happened next defied analysis. The masked figure approached a water merchant, Garrus Toll, a known exploiter who charged 5 throne gelt per liter, triple the already inflated rate. The figure reached into empty air and withdrew a massive mallet, easily 2 meters long, its head stamped with the word ACME in incomprehensible script. The merchant had approximately 1 second to register confusion before the mallet came down. Physics broke. The merchant didn't explode or die. Instead, he compressed like an accordion, his body folding into itself with a sound like a squeaky toy. When the mallet lifted, the merchant was now 30 centimeters tall, perfectly proportioned, staggering in confused circles while his voice came out in high-pitched squeaks. The crowd stared. The masked figure tipped his purple hat, reached into the merchant's stall, and began throwing water containers into the crowd, not with malice, but with theatrical generosity. "Free water," the figure proclaimed, his voice carrying impossible clarity through the market's din, "free water for everyone. No more paying 5 throne gelt to drink recycled piss. This establishment is now under new management. The crowd hesitated for exactly 3 seconds before the survival instinct overrode caution. They surged forward, grabbing containers, trampling each other in desperation for clean water. The masked figure laughed, not the cruel laugh of a dark Eldar torturer or the mad cackle of a chaos-addled psyker, but genuine, infectious laughter that somehow made the violence seem absurd rather than tragic. Then the Arbites patrol arrived. Thros watched as his enforcers appeared on screen, 6 of them in full riot gear, shock mauls crackling. Enforcer Sergeant Crotty, a 20-year veteran, raised his shotgun and bellowed the standard Imperial warning, "By order of the Adeptus Arbites, you are under arrest for inciting public disorder. Surrender immediately or face summary execution." The masked figure turned to face them, and even through the poor-quality picked feed, Thros could see the being's grin widen. "Oh, boys in black. Love the aesthetic, very fascist chic. But you see, I've got a problem with authority." The figure reached behind his back and withdrew a sign, a physical sign that read, "Bang," in bold letters. He held it up like a shield. Crotty fired. The shotgun blast hit the sign directly. The sign said, "Bang." The shotgun exploded in Crotty's hands, not dangerously, but in a shower of flowers and confetti that left the enforcer standing there, covered in petals, his weapon transformed into a bouquet of roses. The other enforcers opened fire. Stub guns, shotguns, even a plasma pistol. The masked figure dodged, but not through speed or skill. He simply wasn't where the shots were. He moved like an ancient Terran animation, his body stretching and compressing, leaving after images, at one point splitting into 3 identical versions that converged back into one. A plasma bolt passed through the space where his chest should be, and he responded by reaching into his suit and withdrawing a cartoon bomb, a perfect sphere with a lit fuse and the word "bomb" helpfully labeled on the side. He tossed it gently toward the enforcers. They scattered, diving for cover. The bomb landed, bounced once, twice, and then, transformed into a cream pie. It exploded not with fire, but with whipped cream that coated every enforcer in a 3-meter radius. Their armor, their weapons, their dignity, all covered in dessert. The masked figure tipped his hat again. "Pies on the house, officers. Consider it a peace offering from your friendly neighborhood agent of chaos." He pronounced chaos with a hard K, somehow making it sound playful rather than heretical. Then he was gone. Not running, just gone, as if he'd stepped behind an invisible curtain. Thros stopped the playback. His command chamber was silent except for the hum of cogitators and the distant rumble of the Hive's manufactorums. Every enforcer present stared at the screen, their training warring with the impossibility of what they'd witnessed. "Opinions," Thros said flatly. "Rogue Psyker," offered Arbitrator Mensk, his voice uncertain. "Has to be. Reality manipulation, matter transmutation, those are warp phenomena." The Psykers registered nothing, Thros countered. Astropath Vale had a seizure, but she couldn't identify the source. Said it felt wrong, like something that shouldn't exist. "Xenos technology," suggested another enforcer. "No Xenos artifact in Imperial records produces these effects." Thros leaned back in his command throne, feeling his 60 years of age settle into his bones. And the behavior pattern doesn't match any known threat. Chaos cultists don't give away free water. Genestealers don't transform weapons into flowers. This is fun, whispered Arbitrator Yana, the precinct's youngest enforcer. Everyone turned to stare at her. She flushed but continued. "Sir, with respect, that thing was having fun. It wasn't killing for the blood god or corrupting for Slaanesh. It was playing. Like a child." Thros wanted to reprimand her, but he couldn't. She was right. And that terrified him more than any chaos incursion. "Vox the precinct fortress," he ordered. "I want every enforcer on high alert. And send an astropathic message to the subsector arbitrator general. We need." The lights went out. Emergency lumens kicked in, bathing the command chamber in red. Alarms screamed. The view screen flickered, showing camera feeds from across the sublevel, and on every feed, the same image appeared. The masked figure, waving directly at the cameras, his grin impossibly wide. Knock knock, his voice echoed from every Vox speaker in the precinct. Anybody home? I just wanted to discuss your precinct's policy on excessive force and water price gouging. Also, I brought cookies. The main blast doors, 10-ton slabs of reinforced adamantium, began to glow. Not with heat, but with green light that outlined a perfect circle. The doors didn't explode or melt. They simply fell inward, landing with a thunderous crash, revealing the masked figure standing in the breach, holding a plate of actual cookies. "Who wants chocolate chip?" he asked cheerfully, and Thros realized that the galaxy had introduced something into his life that decades of service had never prepared him for, a threat that laughed. The firefight lasted exactly 4 minutes and achieved nothing except demonstrating the complete inadequacy of Imperial weaponry against cartoon physics. Thros watched from behind an overturned desk as his enforcers unleashed hell upon the masked intruder. Shotguns roared, stub guns cracked, and Enforcer Kane's prized bolt pistol, a relic from the Macarian Crusade, fired explosive rounds that should have reduced the target to bloody mist. Each shot found its mark. Each shot did absolutely nothing useful. The masked figure danced through the barrage like a performer in some ancient Terran vaudeville show. Bullets curved around him, leaving comical holes in his yellow suit that he could stick his fingers through and waggle at the shooters. A bolt round struck him square in the chest, and instead of detonating, it pushed him backward across the floor in a sliding motion, his feet leaving cartoon skid marks on the rockcrete. When he stopped, he dusted himself off, reached into the smoking hole in his chest, and withdrew the unexploded bolt round, examining it like a curious artifact. Self-propelled mass-reactive shells. Clever. Very grim future of warfare. But you know what these need? He pulled out a marker from nowhere and drew a smiley face on the bolt round. Personality. He tossed it back toward Kane. The bolt round sprouted tiny legs and ran across the floor, chirping happily, before exploding in a shower of streamers and party favors. "Heresy," roared Arbitrator Mensk, drawing his power maul. The weapon crackled with disruptive energy fields capable of pulverizing bone and rupturing organs. He charged with the fury of righteous imperial justice, swinging with enough force to cave in a space marine's helmet. The masked figure caught the maul one-handed. The energy field didn't harm him, instead, it made his hand vibrate comically, blurring until it resembled a pink cloud. Ooh, tingles. He yanked the weapon away with casual ease, examined it, and then, impossibly, tied the solid metal shaft into a perfect bow. He handed it back to Mensk like a gift. "There you go, officer. Much prettier this way." Mensk stared at his weapon, now completely useless, shaped like a decorative ribbon. Thros made a decision. "Cease fire." His augmetic voice amplifier boomed through the command chamber. "Cease fire, Emperor, damn you all." The shooting stopped. Smoke hung in the air, mingling with the smell of propellant and ozone. 30 enforcers stood in a semicircle, weapons trained on the masked figure, who seemed utterly unbothered by the hostility. He was currently juggling 3 grenades, live grenades, their activation pins clearly removed, while whistling a tune that hurt Thros's ears with its alien rhythm. "Thank you," the figure said brightly, catching all 3 grenades and somehow putting them back into enforcers' belt pouches without anyone noticing. "Much more civilized. Now, I believe we got off on the wrong foot. Let me introduce myself properly." He swept his purple fedora off in an elaborate bow. "You can call me Big Head. At least, that's what one particularly rude mortal called me back on ancient Terra, and you know what? It stuck. I am the living embodiment of your suppressed desires, your hidden chaos, your desperate need to just cut loose in this horrifically depressing existence you call civilization." "You speak heresy," Thros said, stepping out from cover. His hand rested on his bolt pistol, though he suspected it would be as useful as throwing harsh language. This world serves the God Emperor of mankind. Your presence here violates approximately 417 articles of imperial law. Surrender, and you will be granted the mercy of a quick execution rather than being handed over to the Inquisition. Big Head tilted his head, the mask's painted features somehow conveying genuine curiosity despite being immobile. The Inquisition. Right. The guys who torture people for thought crimes and blow up planets for having the wrong books. Very proportional response system you've got here. He pulled out a data slate, thrown new from where, and began scrolling through it. Let me check my schedule. Surrender to fascist theocracy, get tortured to death, How about NO? He crushed the data slate, which exploded into a flock of doves that flew through the command chamber, defecating on several enforcers before vanishing into sparks of green light. Who are you? Frost demanded, his augmetic eye cycling through analysis spectrums. Thermal showed the figure as blazing hot in some areas, ice cold in others, sometimes not registering at all. Auspec's readings were nonsense. The cogitators kept displaying error messages or, bizarrely, smiley faces. What are you? Xenos? Demon? Some new abomination spawned by the warp? Oh, I'm much older than your warp gods, Marshal. Big Head's voice dropped an octave, losing its manic edge for just a moment. I'm from a time when gods walked among mortals and played tricks for the sheer joy of it. Before your chaos gods were even born from humanity's collective psychic scream, there were other powers. Older powers. Trickster gods who understood that reality is just a really elaborate joke, and the punchline is that everyone takes it so seriously. He spun in place, his suit transforming through a dozen colors before settling back on yellow. Your Imperium is the least funny thing I've ever encountered, and I once spent a century in a pocket dimension with no one but a philosopher who only spoke in syllogisms. You people have turned existence into a grinding, joyless, bureaucratic nightmare where the only acceptable emotions are duty, hatred, and more duty. You've got a corpse on a throne you call a god, you feed 10,000 psychers to him daily like some kind of cosmic wood chipper, and you think this is normal. The Emperor protects, Thras said automatically, but the words felt hollow. Does he though? Big Head was suddenly nose-to-nose with Thras, having crossed 15 meters in the blink of an eye. Does he really? Because from where I'm standing, and I can see a lot from behind this lovely wooden face, he's been a corpse for 10,000 years, and you're all just weekend at Bernie's ing a dead guy while an entire galaxy uses you as a punching bag. Thras's hand tightened on his bolt pistol. Heresy of the highest order. You will. I will what? Big Head spread his arms wide. You can't kill me. Your guns don't work. Your power weapons don't work. I literally do not care about your threats because I operate on different rules, old man. Toon force. Cartoon logic. The power of comedic timing and narrative convenience. You exist in a universe of cold, hard physics and miserable grimdark consequences. I exist in a reality where the only rule is, if it's funny, it happens. To demonstrate, he reached into Thras's uniform pocket and withdrew a custard pie. Thras hadn't been carrying a custard pie. Custard pies didn't exist on Severance Prime, food paste and corpse starch were the only desserts available to anyone below the Spire nobles. Big Head held the pie thoughtfully. Now, traditionally, this is where I'd shove this in your face. Classic gag. Never gets old. But you know what? You've got kind eyes under all that scarring and augmetics. You've been doing this job for decades, watching people suffer, enforcing unjust laws because the alternative is letting this whole rotten hive collapse into even worse violence. You're tired. You're so tired. He set the pie down gently on Thras's desk. So here's what's going to happen, Marshal Thras. Yes, I know your name, I know everyone's names, it came with the mask, I'm going to leave. You're going to file a report that I'm a Class Alpha Psyker who needs inquisitorial intervention. The Inquisition will show up, as they do, and then things are going to get really interesting. In the meantime, I'm going to wander your horrible Hive city and do something it desperately needs. And what, Thras asked quietly, is that? Big Head's grin somehow widened further, his eyes blazing with green fire. I'm going to make people laugh. He snapped his fingers. Every weapon in the command chamber transformed simultaneously. Bolt pistols became rubber chickens, shock mauls became balloon animals, shotguns became bouquets of flowers. The enforcers shouted in alarm, clutching their transformed equipment in confusion. Big Head tipped his hat one final time, walked backward through a wall that rippled like water, and was gone. Thras stood in the chaos of his command chamber, surrounded by his humiliated enforcers, staring at the custard pie on his desk. Against every regulation, every doctrine, every principle drilled into him through decades of service, he felt his mouth twitch. Not quite a smile. But close. He picked up the Voxcaster. Get me an astropath. Priority transmission to Inquisitor Covenant of the Ordo Hereticus. Tell him, Thras paused, searching for words that could possibly convey what he'd witnessed. Tell him we have a situation that defies classification. And may the Emperor have mercy on us all. In the Underhive below, Big Head's laughter echoed through tunnels that hadn't heard joy in millennia, and something fundamental began to shift in the darkness. The message reached Inquisitor Rathvin Covenant 47 hours later, translated from astropathic screaming into barely coherent Low Gothic by a traumatized choir of telepaths. 3 of them had suffered cerebral hemorrhages trying to convey the imagery they'd received, a green mask laughing, reality bending like melted wax, the taste of madness that wasn't quite chaos. Covenant read the report in his private sanctum aboard the strike cruiser Unrelenting Righteousness, orbiting Severance Prime's second moon. He was a tall man, gaunt from decades of stim abuse and penitent fasting, his face a roadmap of scars earned hunting heretics across a dozen sectors. His augmetic left eye was a gift from the Adeptus Mechanicus, capable of detecting warp taint at 50 meters. His right hand had been replaced after a demon of Nurgle had rotted it to the bone. The bionic replacement was inscribed with 666 wards against chaos, an ironic number that made him smile grimly whenever he noticed. He did not smile now. Arbitrator Marshal Thras claims the entity displays reality manipulation consistent with Alpha Plus Psyker manifestation. His interrogator, Celine Vex, read aloud from the data slate. She was young, 32, with the zealous fire of someone who'd only been hunting heresy for a decade. But all sanctioned psychers in the subsector report no warp disturbance. The astropaths describe it as laughter where there should be screaming. That's a direct quote, my lord. And the physical manifestations? Covenant asked, steepling his fingers. The sanctum's walls were lined with tomes bound in human leather, each one a grimoire of forbidden knowledge, chaos texts, xenos philosophies, heretical theories, all studied so that he might better recognize and destroy corruption. Transmutation of matter, impossible movement, violation of conservation of mass and energy, and, Vex hesitated, her cheeks coloring slightly. The conversion of military-grade weaponry into flowers, confections, and novelty items. Tzeentch sorcery, Covenant said immediately. The changer of ways delights in such mockery. The entity is likely a demon of the architect of fate, manifested through some cult summoning. Prepare a full inquisitorial task force. We'll make planetfall within 6 hours and begin purging operations. If necessary, we'll invoke exterminatus and cleanse the world entirely. My lord, with respect, Vex's augmetic hand gripped the data slate tightly. The entity has caused 0 casualties. It freed water supplies, humiliated Arbites enforcers, but killed no one. That's unusual for demonic manifestation. Covenant's augmetic eye whirred as it focused on his subordinate. Are you questioning my assessment, interrogator? No, my lord. I'm merely noting the discrepancy. Every demon seeks souls, corruption, or slaughter. This entity seeks comedy. Comedy is corruption, Covenant said coldly. Joy in this universe is an illusion, a lie whispered by the ruinous powers to make mortals lower their guard. The Emperor teaches that life is duty, suffering, and service. Laughter is the first step toward complacency, and complacency invites damnation. He stood, his power armor servos hissing. Prepare my retinue. We deploy immediately. And Vex? Yes, my lord. If you ever question me again, I will have you mind-scrubbed and reassigned to a penal legion. Understood? Vex bowed her head. Understood, my lord. In the Underhive of Severance Prime, Big Head was having the time of his existence. He'd spent the last 2 days exploring the Hive's lower levels, and what he'd found had genuinely shocked him, and shocking the living embodiment of chaotic mischief was no small feat. The poverty was staggering. Children with swollen bellies from malnutrition fought over scraps of moldy bread. Workers with broken bodies dragged themselves to 14-hour shifts in toxic manufactorums, their lungs black from chemical exposure, knowing they'd be dead before 40. Gangs ruled through terror, extracting tribute from those who could barely afford to eat. And over it all, the ecclesiarchy preached that suffering was holy, that pain brought them closer to the God Emperor, that their misery had divine purpose. This is disgusting, Big Head muttered, standing on a gantry overlooking sublevel 91's main throughway. His mask's perpetual grin seemed almost sad, if such a thing were possible. I've seen tyrannies before. Hell, I've caused some fantastic chaos in authoritarian regimes. But this? This isn't even tyranny with style. This is just, grinding people into paste and calling it holy. Below, he watched a woman collapse from exhaustion, her body giving out mid-stride. The crowd flowed around her like water around a stone. No one stopped. No one helped. Stopping meant being late to your shift. Being late meant punishment. Punishment meant death or servitorization. Big Head felt something unfamiliar stir behind the mask, not anger, because anger was too hot, too immediate. This was colder. This was offense. The mask had been created by Loki, the trickster god, to embody chaos and mischief. It thrived on breaking rules, on showing that reality was malleable, on proving that the powerful were just as vulnerable to custard pies as anyone else. But it had never been meant for cruelty. Chaos, yes. Mayhem, absolutely. But not this systematic crushing of the human spirit. All right, he said to no one in particular. All right, you gothic nightmare of a civilization. You want to see what real chaos looks like? Let me show you what happens when someone who actually doesn't play by the rules decides to rewrite them. He stepped off the gantry and fell 30 meters, landing with a cartoon boing sound, his legs compressing like springs before launching him back up. He caught the collapsed woman mid-bounce, cradling her gently, and landed on the throughway. The crowd parted, recognizing the yellow-suited figure that had become the subject of frantic vox chatter and panicked rumors. Medical assistance required. Big Head announced, and reached into his suit. He withdrew a bottle, not colored liquid in recycled plastic, but an actual glass bottle with a label reading, Dr. Big Head's Miracle Tonic, cures what ails ya. He uncorked it and poured a small amount into the woman's mouth. The effect was immediate. Color returned to her cheeks. Her breathing steadied. She opened her eyes, clear, bright eyes that had been clouded with exhaustion, and stared at him in wonder. Who, what? Call me your friendly neighborhood agent of chaos, Big Head said, helping her to her feet. She stood easily, her body suddenly free of the chronic pain that had plagued her for years. And you are? Mara. Mara Koss. She touched her face, feeling smooth skin where there had been chemical burns. How did you, what did you? Don't worry about it. Cartoon logic and complete disregard for your universe's conservation of energy laws. Listen, Mara, do you like your life? The question was so absurd that she laughed, a rusty sound, as if her throat had forgotten how. Like it? We don't like anything here. We survive. Right. And that's the problem. Big Head spun in a circle, addressing the crowd that had stopped despite the danger, drawn by the spectacle. You people have been told that suffering is virtue, that misery brings you closer to your corpse god, that the only meaning in life is to die for an Imperium that sees you as meat. And you know what? That's a lie. A big, ugly, 10,000-year-old lie told by people who live in towers and never miss a meal. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Dangerous murmurs. Speaking against the Imperium was heresy. Heresy meant execution. The Emperor provides, someone said weakly, the catechism automatic. Does he? Big Head's voice cut through the murmurs like a lost cutter through flesh. Really? Look around. Does this look like Providence? Or does it look like you're all being bled dry by a system that stopped caring about humanity somewhere around the 30th millennium? A hand fell on Big Head's shoulder, heavy, armored. He turned to find himself facing an Arbites enforcer, one of the dozens who'd been hunting him since the Precinct incident. The man's shotgun was aimed at Big Head's chest, his finger on the trigger. By order of the Adeptus Arbites, you are under. Big Head moved. His hand shot out, grabbed the shotgun barrel, and tied it into a knot. Then he tapped the enforcer's helmet with one finger. The armor didn't dent or break, instead, it transformed. Black ceramite became bright pink. The Aquila on the breastplate became a smiley face. The enforcer's shock maul became a pool noodle. New dress code, Big Head announced cheerfully. Much more approachable. Now, where was I? Oh right, revolution. He snapped his fingers, and the street transformed. Water fountains erupted from the rockcrete, actual fountains, flowing with clean, drinkable water. Food stalls appeared, stocked with real food, not corpse starch, bread, fruit, vegetables that shouldn't exist on a hive world. The perpetual gloom lifted as bioluminescent plants sprouted from cracks in the walls, bathing the street in soft blue light. This is heresy, the enforcer shouted, his voice muffled and ridiculous through his pink helmet. You're corrupting the Emperor's faithful. Am I? Big Head looked at the crowd, hundreds now, drawn by the commotion. Let me ask you all something. If your Emperor really loved you, wouldn't he want you to be happy? Wouldn't he want you to eat real food, drink clean water, maybe smile once in a while? Or is it possible, just possible, that the people who claim to speak for him have been lying to keep you obedient? The silence that followed was profound. Then Mara Koss laughed. It was a small sound, but it carried. Others joined her, hesitant at first, then growing. The sound of laughter in the Underhive was alien, shocking, almost obscene. And in orbit above, Inquisitor Covenant's psychic detectors screamed alarms. The inquisitorial shuttle descended through Severance Prime's polluted atmosphere like a black dagger, its prow carved with the smiley face, equals symbol that made even planetary governors tremble. Covenant stood in the passenger bay, surrounded by his retinue, 20 battle sisters from the Order of the Ebon Chalice, 10 Tempestus Scions from the 44th Scion Shrikes, 3 sanctioned psychers in psychic dampening collars, and a tech priest who'd installed so many augmetics that his humanity was a legal technicality. Tactical assessment, Muggos Hexen, Covenant ordered as the shuttle shuddered through turbulence. The tech priest's mechadendrites twitched, interfacing with the shuttle's Auspex array. His Vox grill crackled with binaric cant before translating to Gothic. Inquisitor, the readings are contradictory. I detect no warp signatures consistent with demonic manifestation. However, localized reality fluctuations register across sublevels 87 through 95. Matter and energy conservation laws are being violated on a scale that should be impossible without psychic intervention. Should be impossible, Covenant repeated. But manifestly is occurring. That indicates either xenos technology or warp corruption too subtle for standard detection. Either way, it ends today. Sister Superior Bridget, leader of the Battle Sisters, checked her bolter's ammunition, sanctified rounds blessed by a cardinal and inscribed with litanies of hatred. My lord, what are our rules of engagement? The reports indicate civilian casualties are minimal. Minimal casualties today, Covenant said coldly. But corruption spreads. One heretic today becomes 1,000 tomorrow, 10,000 the day after. We cauterize the wound before infection reaches the bone. All civilians in the affected zone are to be considered potentially compromised. Those who resist are heretics. Those who cooperate may be spared pending purification rituals. The shuttle landed on a HAB platform on sublevel 87, its retrothrusters scattering the usual crowd of Underhive scum. Covenant emerged first, his inquisitorial rosette gleaming on his chest, a symbol that gave him absolute authority to judge, condemn, and execute in the Emperor's name. Behind him, his retinue deployed in textbook formation, weapons sweeping for targets. What they found made Covenant's blood run cold. The street had been transformed. Not corrupted in the traditional sense, there were no chaos sigils, no pulsing flesh walls, no screaming faces in the stone. Instead, the transformation was almost wholesome. Clean water flowed from impossible fountains. Real food, vegetables, bread, actual protein that wasn't reconstituted corpses, sat in stalls being distributed freely. The bioluminescent plants cast warm light that made the perpetual shadows retreat. And everywhere, painted on walls in garish colors, were messages. Smile. It's not heresy if you're happy. The Emperor protects. But Big Head provides. Why so grimdark? Worst of all were the people. They looked healthy. Their skin wasn't the typical Underhive gray. Their eyes weren't dead with despair. Children played, actually played, a concept Covenant had nearly forgotten existed in the lower hive. And they were laughing. By the throne, whispered one of the scions. What kind of demon spreads joy? The most dangerous kind, Covenant answered. Seal the perimeter. No one leaves this zone. Muggos, begin scanning for the entity's location. Before Hexen could respond, the air shimmered, and reality bent. A door appeared in the middle of the street, not built, not summoned, just suddenly there as if it had always existed. It was bright red with a brass knocker shaped like a laughing face. The door swung open, and Big Head stepped through, carrying an umbrella despite the lack of rain. Inquisitor Rathvin Covenant. Big Head's voice boomed with theatrical enthusiasm. I've been expecting you. Well, not expecting, because that implies I'm bound by linear causality, which, spoiler alert, I'm not. But I did figure the Imperium would send someone with Inquisitor in their title and unresolved childhood trauma in their psychological profile. Come on in. I've prepared refreshments. The door remained open behind him, revealing what looked impossibly like a cozy study, wooden walls, a fireplace, comfortable chairs. In the Underhive. Where such things couldn't exist. Stand down, Covenant ordered his retinue, stepping forward. His augmetic eye cycled through every spectrum, thermal, auspex, psychic resonance. The entity registered as everything and nothing simultaneously. One moment he appeared as blazing warp energy, the next as completely inert matter, the next as something that made the cogitators display error messages in languages that hadn't been spoken since the age of strife. You are the source of the corruption, Covenant stated. Not a question. Corruption? That's harsh. Big Head pulled out a cigar, unlit, and somehow chewed on it despite the mask covering his entire face. I prefer unsanctioned improvement of quality of life. I've been wandering your hive for 2 days, Inquisitor, and you know what I've learned. This place is a nightmare. Capital N nightmare. You've turned human existence into an assembly line that produces corpses and misery. And for what? To feed a dead guy on a throne who probably can't even taste the 10,000 psyker souls you feed him daily? Heresy. Sister Superior Bridget raised her bolter. You blaspheme against the God Emperor. Die, demon. She fired. The bolt round streaked toward Big Head's chest with the fury of righteous hatred. Big Head reached up and caught it mid-flight. The bolt round didn't explode, instead, it sprouted tiny wings and a halo, transforming into a cherubic version of itself. It flew around his head twice, making little pew-pew sounds, then dissolved into sparkles. You know, Big Head said conversationally, in my experience, people who scream heresy at every little thing usually have some pretty fragile belief systems. If your faith requires murdering everyone who asks questions, maybe, and I'm just spitballing here, it's not actually that strong. Covenant raised his hand, halting his retinue from opening fire. You're not a demon. Muggos Hexen's readings confirm you're not warp-spawned. So what are you? Xenos? Some ancient human psyker from before Old Night? A relic of the dark age of technology? Ding ding ding. Door number 3. Big Head spun his umbrella. Well, sort of. I'm from Terra, the real Terra, before you people renamed it Holy Terra and turned it into a bureaucratic hellhole. I'm from when Earth had one sun, not millions of colony worlds. When gods walked among mortals and played pranks because existence was supposed to be fun. He gestured to the street around them, where underhivers were cautiously approaching the food stalls. These people have been told their entire lives that suffering is virtue. That the only purpose of existence is to serve and die for an Imperium that sees them as expendable. That happiness is heresy. And you know what I think about that? Big Head's voice dropped, losing its manic edge. The green light in his eyes intensified until Covenant had to look away. I think it's the biggest con job in galactic history. I think somewhere along the line, humanity forgot that life is supposed to have meaning beyond duty and death. And I think your Imperium is terrified of what might happen if people remembered. Pretty words, Covenant said, his hand resting on his bolt pistol. But you're still committing tech heresy, spreading unsanctioned gifts, and undermining Imperial authority. The punishment is death. Is it though? Big Head tilted his head. Because here's the thing, Inquisitor. You can't kill me. Your weapons don't work on me. I operate on narrative logic, not physics. I'm the living embodiment of chaos, not your chaos with the capital C and the tentacles and the screaming, but real chaos. Unpredictability. Freedom. The refusal to accept that this, he gestured at the hive around them, is the best humanity can achieve. One of the sanctioned psychers, a young woman with milky white eyes and psychic inhibitor plugs drilled into her skull, suddenly convulsed. Her voice emerged strangled, distorted. He speaks truth, not chaos truth, older truth, the laughing gods, before the fall, before the birth of she who thirsts. Silence her. Covenant barked. A scion stepped forward and injected the psyker with a sedative. She collapsed, drooling. Big Head watched this with something that might have been sadness. You're so terrified of the truth that you drug your own people when they start to see it. That's not faith, Inquisitor. That's control. And control is just another word for fear. I fear nothing, Covenant lied. I serve the Emperor's will. Do you? Big Head stepped closer, and despite Covenant's decades of training, he felt a primal urge to retreat. Or do you serve the Imperium's bureaucracy? Do you serve the system that keeps billions in chains and calls it devotion? When was the last time you actually helped someone, Inquisitor? When was the last time you made a person smile instead of scream? Covenant's hand tightened on his pistol. I have executed 10,000 heretics. I have purged 17 demon incursions. I have saved entire worlds from corruption. By destroying them, Big Head said softly. You've saved nothing. You've just prolonged the agony. Your Imperium is dying, Inquisitor. It's been dying for 10,000 years. And the only thing keeping it shambling forward is people like you, too terrified to imagine an alternative. Enough. Covenant drew his bolt pistol and fired point-blank at Big Head's face. The bolt round entered Big Head's open mouth. There was a moment of silence. Then Big Head's cheeks puffed out comically, and he spat the round into his hand. It had been transformed into a lollipop. He offered it to Covenant. Cherry flavor. Want it? Covenant stared at the lollipop, and for the first time in 30 years of inquisitorial service, he felt something crack inside him. Not his faith, that remained, cold and hard as adamantium. But his certainty. His absolute conviction that he understood the nature of threats to the Imperium. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Big Head's grin somehow softened. "I want people to remember that life doesn't have to be this way. I want them to laugh, to hope, to believe that tomorrow could be better than today. And I want you, Inquisitor Rathvin Covenant, to ask yourself one question: if the Emperor truly loved humanity, would he want them to live like this?" Before Covenant could respond, reality lurched. The sky, the artificial sky of the Hive's upper atmosphere, tore open. Not with the purple-black of a warp rift, but with something else. Something that pulsed with colors that hurt to see, geometries that violated sanity. And from that tear came laughter, not Big Head's manic cackling, but something older, vaster, more terrible. Muggos Hexen's vox grills screamed static. "Inquisitor. Warp breach detected. But, the signature doesn't match chaos. It's impossible, it's..." Tzeentch, Covenant breathed. Big Head looked up at the rift and sighed. "Oh great. The bird brain finally noticed me. This is going to get complicated." The rift pulsed with impossible colors, blue that was also somehow every other color, pink that tasted of lies, gold that whispered secrets. From its depths emerged not demons in the traditional sense, but concepts given form. Geometric shapes that rearranged themselves into screaming faces. Flames that burned cold and froze hot. And threading through it all, a voice that spoke in 9,000 languages simultaneously, each one saying something different but meaning the same thing. Interesting. The word hit like a psychic shockwave. Every mortal on the street collapsed to their knees, clutching their heads. The Battle Sisters' faith held them upright, barely, their prayers becoming frantic litanies. The sanctioned psychers began bleeding from their eyes, their inhibitor plugs glowing white-hot as they tried to process the sheer wrongness of the presence. Only Covenant and Big Head remained standing, Covenant through decades of mental conditioning and his augmetic eyes' psychic filters, Big Head because he simply didn't care about the rules of psychic intimidation. "Oh look," Big Head said dryly. "The architect of fate himself. Or one of his greater demons." Hard to tell with Tzeentch, everything's layers of deception wrapped in riddles stuffed inside paradoxes. Very high concept, very annoying. From the rift descended a figure that hurt to perceive. It was a lord of change, one of Tzeentch's greatest servants, a towering entity of constantly shifting form. One moment it appeared as an enormous bird with 9 heads, the next as a robed scholar with a staff of crystallized lies, the next as something that couldn't be described because human language lacked the vocabulary. Its eyes, and it had far too many, fixed on Big Head with predatory interest. A mask of Loki, the demon's voice was silk over razors, honey laced with poison. How delightful. How unexpected. How perfectly chaotic. The changer of ways has searched for artifacts such as you across 10,000 realities. And here you are, dropped into our lap like a gift. "I'm not a gift," Big Head said, twirling his umbrella. "I'm more of a return-to-sender situation. And I'm definitely not interested in joining your bird-themed pyramid scheme. I've seen what Tzeentch does to his followers, lot of tentacles, lot of screaming, lot of just-as-planned nonsense. Hard pass." The demon laughed, and the sound shattered windows 3 levels up. "You misunderstand. I do not offer recruitment. I offer merger. Your power, primal, chaotic, uncorrupted by the warp, combined with the infinite schemes of the architect of fate. Together, we could reshape reality itself. No more playing pranks on mortals. True power. True chaos." "Tempting," Big Head admitted. But here's the thing about your brand of chaos, it's not fun. It's just cruelty with extra steps and a lot of tentacles. You don't create chaos for joy, you do it for control. Every scheme, every plan, every just as planned moment, it's all about domination dressed up as enlightenment. And that's boring. Covenant watched this exchange with growing horror. The entity, Big Head, was casually conversing with a greater demon of Tzeentch. Not banishing it, not fleeing, just talking. As if they were equals. As if the demon's reality-shredding presence was merely an inconvenience. Inquisitor, Sister Superior Bridget gasped through gritted teeth, her faith the only thing keeping her conscious under the demon's psychic weight. Orders. Covenant's mind raced. Standard protocol was clear, in the presence of greater demon manifestation, call for immediate Grey Knight support and establish psychic containment. But this situation was anything but standard. The demon had manifested specifically for the masked entity, which meant hold position, Covenant ordered. Do not engage. Let them talk. The Lord of Change's form rippled with amusement. Wise, Inquisitor. Though your wisdom comes too late. This world is already mine. The mask's presence has weakened the veil between real space and the warp. Every laugh, every moment of joy in this miserable hive, they are cracks in the Imperium's order. And through those cracks, change flows. No, Big Head said flatly. That's not how I work. I don't weaken veils or corrupt souls. I just remind people that reality is malleable and suffering isn't inevitable. If your boss wants to claim credit for that, tell him to get in line behind every other cosmic entity who's tried to use me as a pawn. The demon's eyes narrowed, all 17 of them. You dare refuse the architect of fate? I dare a lot of things. It's kind of my whole deal. Big Head reached into his suit and withdrew something that made Covenant's augmetic eye overload with error messages. It was a rubber chicken. A simple, squeaky rubber chicken of the kind that hadn't existed in the Imperium for millennia. The demon stared at the chicken. What? What is that supposed to? Big Head squeezed the chicken. It made a sound, a simple, ridiculous squeak. And that squeak echoed across dimensions, cutting through the demon's psychic presence like a laser blade through flesh. The rift in reality flickered. The Lord of Change stumbled backward, its form destabilizing. Impossible. That doesn't, the laws of reality don't permit. Your laws don't, Big Head agreed. Mine do. See, you greater demons, you chaos gods, you operate on belief and emotion and the warp's weird metaphysical rules. I operate on something older and more fundamental, comedic timing. And right now, in this moment, the funniest possible outcome is a greater demon of Tzeentch, master of infinite schemes and cosmic manipulation, being defeated by a rubber chicken. He squeezed the chicken again. Squeak. The Lord of Change shrieked, not in pain, but in profound confusion. Its form began unraveling, not destroyed but dismissed, sent back to the warp not through banishment rituals or Grey Knight intervention, but through sheer narrative absurdity. The rift began to close, its impossible colors fading. This is not over, the demon howled as it was pulled back into the immaterium. The architect of fate sees all possible futures. We will possess that mask. We will. Squeak. The rift snapped shut with a sound like reality sighing in relief. The psychic pressure vanished. The Underhivers who'd collapsed began stirring, groaning, confused about what had just happened. The Battle Sisters lowered their weapons slowly, staring at Big Head with expressions caught between awe and terror. Covenant found his voice. You just banished a greater demon with a toy. Technically, I dismissed it with comedic irony, Big Head corrected. There's a difference. Banishment requires rituals, faith, psychic power. Dismissal just requires recognizing that sometimes, the universe has a sense of humor. He looked at the rubber chicken fondly. This little guy has gotten me out of more jams than you'd believe. Once used it to defeat an eldritch horror from beyond spacetime. Long story. This changes nothing, Covenant said, though his voice lacked conviction. You're still a threat to Imperial order. The fact that you can resist chaos corruption makes you more dangerous, not less. An entity with your power, operating without oversight. Without control, Big Head interrupted. That's what really bothers you, isn't it? Not that I'm dangerous, but that I can't be controlled. The Imperium's entire philosophy is built on control, control through faith, control through fear, control through grinding people down until they're too exhausted to question. And I represent the opposite. Freedom. Chaos. The possibility that people could choose their own path. Freedom is a lie, Covenant said automatically, the words drilled into him through decades of indoctrination. Humanity requires order, structure, the Emperor's guidance. Does it? Big Head gestured to the street around them. The Underhivers were standing now, looking at the space where the rift had been. They should have been terrified, traumatized by demonic presence. Instead, they looked hopeful. Because they'd just watched someone mock a greater demon with a rubber chicken and win. These people just saw a servant of the Chaos Gods get defeated by a joke, Big Head continued. They've seen clean water and real food appear from nothing. They've seen that the rules they've been told are immutable can be bent, broken, rewritten. You can kill me, or try to, but you can't kill what I represent. The idea that things could be different. Covenant's hand tightened on his bolt pistol. Every instinct, every doctrine, every regulation in the Inquisitorial Handbook told him to execute this entity immediately. Call down orbital strikes. Virus bomb the entire sublevel if necessary. Burn away this contamination before it spread. But he'd just watched a greater demon of Tzeentch, a being of infinite schemes and cosmic power, get defeated by a rubber chicken. He'd watched an entity that should be impossible operate completely outside the warp's rules. And most terrifying of all, he'd watched Underhivers smile in the presence of something that should horrify them. What are you really? Covenant asked quietly. Not what you claim to be. What you are. Big Head was silent for a moment, his perpetual grin somehow conveying thoughtfulness. I'm a reminder, Inquisitor. A reminder that before your Imperium, before the Chaos Gods, before humanity spread across the stars and forgot how to laugh, there were other powers. Trickster gods who understood that existence is absurd, that taking yourself too seriously is the first step toward tyranny, and that sometimes the best response to cosmic horror is to laugh in its face. He looked directly at Covenant, and for a moment, the Inquisitor saw something behind the mask, not malice, not corruption, but something that might have been pity. Your Imperium is dying, Inquisitor. Not from chaos, not from xenos, but from its own weight. It's collapsing under 10,000 years of accumulated suffering. And when it finally falls, not if, when, people are going to need to remember that there's another way to live. A way that doesn't require grinding billions into paste for the sake of order. Heresy, Covenant whispered, but the word had no heat. Maybe, Big Head agreed. But I'd rather be a heretic who makes people smile than a faithful servant who makes them scream. He tipped his purple fedora, turned, and began walking away. The crowd parted for him automatically, some reaching out to touch his yellow suit as if seeking blessing. Covenant raised his bolt pistol, aimed at the figure's back, his finger on the trigger. He didn't fire. Sister Superior Bridget stepped forward. My lord. Orders. Covenant lowered his weapon slowly. We, observe. Document everything. Report to the Ordo Hereticus command. This threat is beyond our current capabilities. It was a lie, and he knew it. The truth was simpler and more terrifying, he didn't know if killing this entity would make things better or worse. And uncertainty, for an Inquisitor, was the most dangerous heresy of all. The reports reached Terra 3 weeks later, transmitted via heavily encrypted astropathic relay through a dozen choir stations. By the time they arrived at the Tower of Hegemon, seat of the Inquisitorial Conclave, they'd been analyzed, cross-referenced, and marked with the highest threat classification, Apex Omega. Reserved for threats that could potentially undermine the Imperium's fundamental stability. Lord Inquisitor Torvin Hexmar read the reports in his private chamber, surrounded by data slates and picked captures that documented the impossible. A masked entity that bent reality through comedic timing. A greater demon dismissed with a rubber chicken. Underhivers laughing in the face of despair. And most damning of all, Inquisitor Covenant's recommendation that the entity be observed rather than destroyed. Hexmar was old, even by Rejuvenat standards. He'd served the Inquisition for 217 years, purged 412 heretical movements, and personally overseen 7 exterminatus orders. He understood threats. He understood corruption. He understood how demonic influence worked, slowly, subtly, corrupting through promises of power or forbidden knowledge. This was something else entirely. He makes them laugh, Hexmar muttered, scrolling through witness testimonies. No promises of power. No forbidden knowledge. No corruption of the flesh or spirit. Just joy. Spontaneous, inexplicable joy in the darkest corners of the Imperium. His servo skull, mordant, floated closer, its eye sockets glowing with baleful red light. Query, should we deploy Grey Knights? Deathwatch? Request Adeptus Custodes intervention? No, Hexmar said slowly. Military force won't work. Covenant tried. The Arbites tried. The entity operates outside conventional parameters. Sending more guns will just create more spectacle, more stories, more, he struggled for the word. More myth. That was the real danger, he realized. Not the entity itself, but what it represented. In the 3 weeks since Big Head's appearance on Severance Prime, reports had emerged from 17 other Hive worlds. Similar entities, or perhaps the same one moving impossibly fast, appearing in different sublevels, different sectors. Always in the Underhive. Always among the lowest, most desperate citizens. And everywhere it appeared, the same pattern emerged, laughter, hope, the dangerous idea that suffering wasn't inevitable. Statement, the Imperium's stability relies on acceptance of hierarchy and suffering, mordant intoned in its mechanical voice. Entities that undermine this acceptance represent systemic threat regardless of direct harm caused. Precisely, Hexmar agreed. This isn't about body count. This is about belief. The Imperium functions because billions accept their lot as necessary. They suffer because they believe it serves the Emperor. They die because they believe their death has meaning. But if they start to believe that an alternative exists. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. The Imperium had faced this threat before, during the Age of Apostasy, when Goj Vandir had pushed too far and Sebastian Thor had reminded humanity that faith could be a sword pointed at tyrants. The rain of blood had nearly destroyed everything. The Imperium had survived only by incorporating Thor's reforms, giving people just enough hope to keep them compliant. This was worse. Thor had still preached duty and service. Big Head preached freedom. On Severance Prime, Covenant stood in the ruins of what had been Sublevel 91. 3 weeks since the demon encounter, and the transformation had spread like a virus, or a revelation, depending on perspective. 5 entire sublevels had been converted into what the Underhivers were calling free zones. Areas where the Arbites couldn't enforce imperial law because the population simply refused to comply. Not through violence. Through laughter. Enforcers who tried to extract tithes found their weapons transformed into flowers. Administrative officials who came to collect census data found their data slates playing cheerful music instead of displaying records. Even executions had become impossible. When the Arbites tried to hang 3 heretics for spreading dangerous optimism, the ropes had turned into licorice. The strangest part was the order of it all. The free zones weren't descending into anarchy. Crime had actually decreased. Gangs found their weapons wouldn't function, stub guns fired confetti, blades turned to rubber. Without the ability to enforce control through violence, the gang structures simply collapsed. And in their place, something new emerged, communities organized around cooperation rather than domination. It was horrifying. It was beautiful. It was heresy of the highest order. My Lord Inquisitor, Interrogator Vex approached, her augmetic hand clutching a data slate. The entity has been spotted in sublevel 83. He's hosting a comedy show. Covenant closed his eyes. A comedy show. Yes, my lord. Approximately 3,000 attendees. He's been performing for 6 hours. Our surveillance servitors can't get close, they keep malfunctioning in ways that make them dance. The tech priests are calling it impossible machine spirit contamination. Show me. They descended through the Hive's arterial passages, following the sound. Not the sound of industry or violence or prayers to the Emperor, but laughter. Genuine, joyous laughter echoing through Rock Creek corridors that had known only suffering for millennia. The theater was a repurposed factorum floor. Big Head had transformed it, not with technology or warpcraft, but through his reality-bending presence. Seats appeared where there had been machinery. A stage materialized complete with curtains and lighting that shouldn't exist. And on that stage, the masked entity performed. So I asked the Adeptus Mechanicus tech priest, what's with all the tentacles? And he said, Big Head's voice perfectly mimicked the mechanical cant of the priesthood of Mars, the flesh is weak, but these tentacles are rated for 10,000 hours of continuous use. I said, that's great buddy, but maybe lead with your human face at parties instead of the one made of cables. The crowd roared with laughter. Not the nervous, fearful laughter of citizens afraid to offend, but genuine amusement. Covenant watched their faces, faces he'd seen 1,000 times before in Imperial records, worn down by labor and despair. Now they were alive, engaged, experiencing something other than duty and pain. This has to stop, Vex whispered. My lord, if this spreads to the mid-hive, if the factory workers start believing they deserve better. The entire system collapses, Covenant finished. The manufacturums cease production. The tithes go unpaid. The Imperium loses a world, then a sector, then a segmentum. All because one entity convinced people that laughter is acceptable. Big Head spotted them. Of course he did, the masked figure seemed to see everything. He waved cheerfully. Oh. We've got inquisitorial observers tonight. Give them a round of applause, folks, they're here to decide whether joy is heresy. The crowd actually applauded. Some laughed at the absurdity. Others just clapped because it felt good to acknowledge that the authority figures who normally inspired terror were, in this moment, just part of the show. Covenant felt his finger rest on his bolt pistol's trigger. One shot. End this now. The entity might be unkillable, but surely disrupting his performance would. You're wondering if killing me would solve your problem, Big Head said, his voice carrying perfectly despite the lack of amplification. Spoiler, it won't. Because I'm not the real threat, Inquisitor. The threat is the idea. And ideas don't die when you shoot the person who spoke them first. They spread. They mutate. They grow. He hopped off the stage, approaching Covenant with that unsettling casual confidence. The crowd watched, silent now, sensing the confrontation. I've been thinking about your Imperium, Big Head continued. 10,000 years of grinding people into paste, all in service of a dead emperor who probably didn't want this. You've built a machine that runs on suffering, and you've convinced yourselves it's the only way humanity can survive. But what if you're wrong? We're not, Covenant said, but even he could hear the doubt in his voice. Then prove it. Big Head gestured to the crowd. Look at these people. 3 weeks ago, they were suicidal, broken, ready to die in some pointless factorum accident. Now they're laughing. They're helping each other. They're thriving. And they're doing it without your Imperium's boot on their neck. So tell me, Inquisitor, who's really the threat to humanity's survival? Me, or the system you serve? Covenant looked at the crowd. 3,000 faces. 3,000 souls who, according to every imperial doctrine, should be miserable and grateful for it. But they weren't miserable. They were happy. And that happiness was spreading like wildfire through the Underhive, burning away 10,000 years of accumulated despair. You're a virus, Covenant said quietly. A mimetic hazard. The most dangerous kind, because you don't destroy bodies, you destroy systems. Guilty as charged, Big Head admitted cheerfully. Though I prefer cultural catalyst. I don't destroy systems, I show people they have alternatives. What they do with that knowledge is up to them. Covenant drew his bolt pistol. Aimed it at Big Head's chest. His hand was steady, 40 years of inquisitorial training ensured that. But his conviction wavered. If I let you live, the Imperium will fall, he said. Maybe, Big Head agreed. Or maybe it'll transform into something that doesn't require feeding souls to a corpse god and calling it holy. Maybe humanity will remember that civilization is supposed to make life better, not just more efficiently miserable. And if you're wrong? If removing imperial control leads to chaos, xenos conquest, extinction? Then I'm wrong, and the universe gets darker. But at least people will have tried something different before the end. Big Head's grin softened, became almost human. Isn't that worth the risk? One chance at genuine freedom versus 10,000 more years of grinding misery. Covenant's finger tightened on the trigger. One pull. One bolt round. End this threat before it spread beyond containment. He lowered the weapon. Throne, forgive me, he whispered. Big Head nodded, something like respect in his burning eyes. It already has, Inquisitor. That's the secret no one tells you, forgiveness is free. You just have to accept it. He turned back to the crowd, spreading his arms. All right, folks. That's our show. Remember, laughter isn't heresy, and joy isn't weakness. You deserve to be happy. Now get out there and make the Imperium really uncomfortable. The crowd erupted in cheers, and as Covenant watched them file out, some hugging, some still laughing, all carrying that dangerous spark of hope, he realized he'd just made the most heretical decision of his career. He'd chosen to let people be happy. 3 months later, Big Head vanished from Severance Prime as mysteriously as he'd arrived. The free zones remained, defended not by weapons but by collective refusal. The Imperium could have crushed them, sent in space marines, orbital bombardment, complete extermination. They didn't. Because word had spread. 17 worlds, then 70, then hundreds. Underhives across the Imperium Nihilus and beyond began reporting similar phenomena. Laughter in the darkness. Joy in despair. The dangerous idea that suffering wasn't mandatory. The Inquisition classified it as an apex omega threat and did nothing. Because they realized too late that you can't kill an idea with bullets. You can't orbital bombard hope. And most terrifying of all, they discovered that many Inquisitors, hardened, cynical servants of the Emperor, had begun asking themselves the same question Big Head had posed. What if we're wrong? In the warp, the Chaos Gods stirred uneasily. This wasn't their brand of chaos. This wasn't corruption or damnation. This was something older, something that predated them, something that reminded them that they weren't the only cosmic forces capable of changing reality. And on distant Terra, in the depths of the Imperial Palace, some say the God Emperor stirred on his golden throne. Just slightly. Just enough that 10,000 psychers screamed in unison, their minds flooded with an emotion the Imperium had forbidden for millennia. Laughter. The Mask's journey through the Warhammer 40K universe ended not with a bang, but with a punchline that echoed across the Imperium for generations. Within a year, the phenomenon that began on Severance Prime had spread to over 3,000 worlds. The Administratum tried to classify it, the Mechanicus tried to explain it, and the Ecclesiarchy tried to condemn it. All failed. The free zones persisted, pockets of inexplicable joy in humanity's endless night, defended not by armies but by collective refusal to return to misery. Big Head himself was never seen again after Severance Prime, though rumors persisted. Some claimed he'd moved on to torment the Tau Empire with constructive criticism about their greater good philosophy. Others swore they'd spotted him in Comorak, leaving the Dark Eldar's torture chambers filled with whoopee cushions and their slave pits transformed into impromptu comedy clubs. A particularly wild account from an Orc Whack described a yellow-suited git who'd convinced an entire warband that painting their vehicles in polka dots was proper orky. The Inquisition never officially acknowledged the entity's existence. The records were sealed, marked with classifications so high that even Lord Inquisitors required special dispensation to access them. Officially, the free zones were explained as isolated incidents of mass hysteria, psychological breaks caused by contaminated water supplies or xenos spores. Unofficially, the Inquisition knew the truth: they had encountered something that couldn't be controlled, couldn't be killed, and most dangerously, couldn't be forgotten. Inquisitor Covenant lived another 43 years after his encounter with Big Head. He continued his work hunting heretics and purging threats to the Imperium, but those who knew him noted a change. He became more measured in his judgments, more willing to consider alternatives to immediate execution. Some whispered he'd been corrupted. Others suggested he'd simply learned wisdom. The truth was simpler: he'd realized that the greatest threat to the Imperium wasn't chaos, xenos, or heresy. It was the Imperium itself, its grinding machinery of suffering, its 10,000-year accumulation of cruelty masquerading as necessity. And he'd learned that sometimes, the most radical act of faith was questioning whether the system you served actually served the Emperor's vision. On his deathbed, Covenant's final words were recorded by his successor: Tell them the joke was on us all along. We built hell and called it heaven. We created damnation and called it salvation. And all it took was one laugh to show us the lie. The free zones endured. They didn't spread to consume the Imperium, that would have been too destabilizing, too final. Instead, they remained as persistent reminders that another way was possible. Small islands of hope in an ocean of despair, proving that humanity's spirit couldn't be completely crushed no matter how much weight the Imperium placed upon it. In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. But now, in scattered corners of a million worlds, there is also laughter. Quiet, defiant, infectious laughter that refuses to be silenced. The sound of humanity remembering that before they were warriors, bureaucrats, and martyrs, they were something simpler and more profound. They were people who deserved to be happy. And somewhere, in a dimension beyond the warp, beyond real space, beyond the comprehension of gods both old and new, a wooden mask rested on a pedestal, its painted grin frozen in eternal mischief. Waiting. Always waiting. Because chaos, real chaos, not the corrupted mockery of the ruinous powers, is patient. It doesn't conquer through force or corruption. It spreads through joy, through laughter, through the simple recognition that reality's rules are negotiable and suffering is never mandatory. The mask had shown the 41st millennium one fundamental truth: in a universe where only war exists, the most revolutionary act is choosing to smile. And revolution, once started, can never truly be stopped.